Hello, welcome to the Comic Book Commentary. I'm Bo Leidig, and this week we're going to be continuing our look at one of my absolute favorite Spawn miniseries with Medieval Spawn Witchblade number 2. So let's zoom in and take a closer look. Before we get started today, I would like to apologize if I sound a little bit strange. Allergy season is still in full effect, and pollen is indeed my arch nemesis. First published in June of 1996, we see a phenomenal cover. This, in my opinion, is the way you do an action cover right. No wasted space. You've got Medieval Spawn and Witchblade surrounded by darkness, orcs or goblins, whatever they're supposed to be, just coming in from all sides as the two of them hack and slash their way through the masses. This is so good. I absolutely love this cover. Written by Garth Ennis. Penciled by Brandon Peterson. Inked by Bat, Joe Weems V, Tim Townsend. Colored by Ashby Manson. Computer colored by Richard Eisenoff, John D. Smith, Steve Furcho, I think, Dan Kemp, Dennis Heisler, letters, David Wohl, editor, Michael Urton, associate editor, Victor Lamas, Marco Galli, I believe, ink assist, Peter Steigerwald is dancing jigs with 12 drunken leprechauns, okay. Raul Arroyo and Mary Buxton, production. I know I had to have gotten some of those names wrong. I apologize to anybody who I mispronounced their name. Getting back into the story, we see that our heroes are stepping foot into the land of Faerie for the first time, as Medieval Spawn starts to reminisce about what a beautiful place this used to be and how untouched and unblemished it was and how safe it was, as we see Katerina looking down at the ground kind of in a depressing fashion as Stalker looks out and says, yeah, well, now I wouldn't pay you a penny for it. This is, of course, because the land of Faerie has been absolutely decimated by the forces of the darkness. However, before our heroes can make way in pursuit of Lord Cardinale, they are interrupted when they hear the cries of a fallen leprechaun who is impaled upon a sword. Medieval Spawn immediately approaches him and asks him to give them whatever information he can possibly give to try and track down the people who have done this to him and everyone else in the land of Faerie so that they may be avenged. As this is happening, Stalker looks over to Katerina and says, I hate leprechauns. She's kind of shocked to hear this, as he goes on to say that leprechauns give the Irish a bad name and that he despises how ridiculous they are. He then goes on to say that he believes hundreds of years from now, people will still be expecting the Irish to carry around four-leaf clovers, do little jigs, say top of the morning to you, and eat potatoes. He then tells Katerina, yeah, that's not me, and I hope this doesn't come to pass. Meanwhile, as the leprechaun finishes telling Medieval Spawn all that he can, he then begins to attempt to give them a blessing before they leave, so that they may be successful in their quest. I find it interesting that they made a point to make Stalker seem like kind of a jerk in this moment, as he's not the greatest guy, but also bring up the fact that he's kind of correct. That is sort of the ridiculous notion that we have about the Irish even till this day. Unfortunately, before the leprechaun can finish his blessing, he is crushed to death underneath the boot of Stalker. This enrages Medieval Spawn as he leans into Stalker, his hand aglow with necro energy, and demands to know exactly why he just did that. Stalker gives Medieval Spawn a story about how he couldn't bear to see the little fellow suffer and wanted to put him out of his misery. However, given the explanation of him hating leprechauns that he just gave to Katerina, it seems more likely that he did this out of sheer malice. As the trio starts to walk away, Katerina asks Medieval Spawn what he learned. He explains that the leprechaun told him that the forces of the darkness are headed to the capital city of Belgardiel, I believe is how you're supposed to say that, and that they plan on laying siege to the city, and that they must stop them before they take out the elven kings and the land is entirely lost. At this point, Stalker leans into Katerina and explains to her that this is where the treasure most certainly will lie. At this point, Katerina asks what direction they need to go in, but unfortunately, Medieval Spawn realizes that the leprechaun never actually told them. Though this is not a problem, as suddenly the Witchblade comes to life, juts forward, and expels a tip of a spear from the palm. Katarina realizes that it's pointing them in the correct direction, but Medieval Spawn is a little bit uneasy. He asks her, "Are you positive you can actually control that thing?" Katarina says that no, she's not actually sure, but she's interested in learning what more it can do and exactly what its powers are. Medieval Spawn decides that there's no time to waste, and he heads off in the direction that the spear pointed. As Katarina and Stalker continue to converse amongst themselves, she explains to Stalker that she actually really likes having this gauntlet, even though he doesn't trust it, and that she believes that she and the gauntlet will inevitably make a good team. At this point, Stalker says, "Yeah, I was thinking the same thing." Katarina seems confused, and he tells her, "I was talking about you and me." The idea of the two of them being involved in any way romantically, though, is something that Katarina finds absolutely repulsive, as she tells him that there is absolutely no possibility that this could ever happen, and that she would never consider ever being with someone that she considers to be lower than beetle dung. As she walks away, Stalker just says, "I didn't think it was really that outlandish," but you can see that Katarina is not feeling this at all. And I believe this is really just a way to illustrate and drive home the point of what a scumbag Stalker really is, that he's not only just killed this leprechaun, who, okay, he was dying in a very painful and slow manner, but still, he just killed him when he didn't need to. And then, after, already convincing Katarina to come here so that they can steal elven treasure, he's also trying to hit on her while they're in a field of dead bodies. Like, this guy has absolutely no soul. It is crazy how terrible a person he is. We are then teleported to the gates of Belgardriel, as we see they are indeed under siege by the forces of the darkness. And while the inhabitants of the city are doing their best to defend their home, they are clearly outmatched by the unrelenting forces of evil. Of course, Royale, who would not dare get involved in such a melee, is standing above watching the fight unfold below him as he's approached by Lady Eleanor, who wants a word with him. Royale brings up to the Lady Eleanor that he's surprised she's not involving herself in the battle below, but as we see Lord Cardinale hack an elf in half, she tells him that he seems to have the battle well under his grasp. As the conversation continues, Lady Eleanor brings up some interesting points, telling Royale that he's convinced Lord Cardinale to commit all of his darkness powers to this fight in Faerie, which leaves them vulnerable back on Earth, and if this fails, their earthly empire will crumble. She then asks Royale, "I want to know exactly what it is you're trying to gain here." Royale once again tries to tell her that this is simply because of his magical curiosity, but Lady Eleanor refuses to buy this story as she once again tells him, "I don't believe you." Royale once again tries to get in the good graces of Lady Eleanor, stating that all of this is really irrelevant, as the battle at hand is almost certainly won, and once they breach the walls of the city and bond the Faerie magic with the powers of the darkness, Lord Cardinale will be unstoppable and will certainly be able to take over the entirety of Earth. But at this point, we find out that Lady Eleanor still does not buy any of this, as she tells Royale that Cardinale was doing just fine before he showed up and started to pour poison into his ear. Though this is where Royale makes a key mistake, as he starts to get a little bit too big for his britches. He starts taunting Lady Eleanor, telling her that that's what really is bothering her, that someone besides herself would have any influence over her precious Lord Cardinale. Upon hearing this, Lady Eleanor becomes enraged and tells Royale that she's tired of playing these games and that he forgets she too is of the darkness, as we see a large, disgusting serpent explode out of her mouth. The serpent then coils itself around Royale and lifts him into the air. At this point, Eleanor begins to speak from the mouth of the serpent and asks exactly what is going on. She wants to know what lies within the city walls that's so important to him, and she also wants to know what exactly is going on with the mortal woman, aka Katarina, and this witchblade artifact that she wears on her arm. She wants to know exactly what threat it poses to Lord Cardinale and their plans. Royale tries to weasel his way out of it by stating he can't breathe, but Lady Eleanor isn't buying it, and she demands to know answers immediately. Royale, realizing that she means business and will certainly not hesitate to kill him, finally spills the beans about the Witchblade. He explains to her that the Witchblade and the Darkness are both older than humanity and were created by the ancients to destroy one another, and that if Katarina with the Witchblade manages to meet up with them, that he's not certain who will come out victorious, Katarina or Lord Cardinale. This is something that Lady Eleanor is quite upset to hear, as she asks, "And you didn't think to bring this up to us?" Royale tries to play it off, stating that he didn't want to distract Lord Cardinale in his moment of triumph, but of course Lady Eleanor doesn't buy this at all, as she states that this is going to be something she brings to Cardinale's attention immediately, and that Royale is definitely overstaying his welcome in their forces. Lady Eleanor once again demands that Royale explain to her what his plan is and what exactly he's gotten them into. However, before Royale can answer, Cardinale calls out to Lady Eleanor, stating that he needs her magic to bring down the city walls. Eleanor immediately obeys the command of her master as she drops Royale face first on the ground. She then tells Royale that this conversation is far from over and that the elven scum will soon be dead. Once the city has fallen, they will have a chance to get back to this conversation, and she will get the answers of him that she's demanded. Royale, as he gathers himself, states, "Yes, my lady, this conversation will continue," and as she walks away under his breath, he tells her she'll pay for this. Meanwhile, our heroes are continuing their journey towards the city, and Medieval Spawn begins to ask Katarina about herself. She tells him that there isn't a whole lot to explain, that she was in the army and then left the army to go freelance, and that her father wanted her to be a nun. But she had no intention of doing that. She enjoys fighting, a stiff drink, and a nice roll in the hay, preferably in that order. Medieval Spawn then asks her if she's traveled. She explains that she's been as far north as Norway and as far south as Central Africa. He asks if at any point she's been to Italy, perhaps, in the Sardinia area. I think I'm saying that right. I'm not really that well versed in Italian. She says yes, about 5 years ago, but then he corrects her, stating that it was more like 7. This immediately enrages Katarina, as she once again is trying to figure out why on earth Medieval Spawn knows so much about her. She states, "You knew my name when we first met, and now you know where I was 5 years ago. Who are you and how do you know me?" However, thankfully for Medieval Spawn, before he can muster up an answer, they're interrupted when Stalker alerts them to an imposing danger that is right on their heels. We then see that the trio is being attacked by a unit of gargoyles. Ever the coward, Stalker immediately turns and runs for his life, screaming, leaving the pair of Katarina and Medieval Spawn to fend for themselves. Katarina immediately generates a spear from the Witchblade, and she and Medieval Spawn waste no time in hacking their way through the gargoyles, leaving a shower of blood and gore in their midst. Unfortunately for Stalker, one of the gargoyles has been able to slip past the pair and is pursuing him, taunting him, telling him that he loves when his food begs for its life. In his panicked state, Stalker drops his crossbow, which upon impacting the ground releases all of its bolts into the pursuing gargoyle, killing him immediately, which means that Stalker inadvertently saved his own life. Meanwhile, as Katarina and Medieval Spawn continue their battle with the rest of the gargoyles, one gargoyle does manage to get the drop on Medieval Spawn, clubbing him in the side of the head, knocking off his helmet. We are then treated to a really cool pinup by Aaron Weisenfeld and Ashby Manson, and I think you all are going to like this one once you see it, because I certainly do. I absolutely love the subject matter of this pinup. The idea that these orc, goblin things, whatever they are, creatures of the darkness, have constructed this giant medieval mech out of wood and chains and all other manners of things is such a cool idea. I also really like the attention to detail here, that it requires an entire crew of them to pilot, each arm requiring their own individual pilots to keep moving, as well as a team to keep the mech itself going forward, is such a unique idea. And I kind of wish that this had been brought into the mainline story in some way and not just used for a pinup, but I still really like it. The only criticism I have is that the background is mostly just open skybox. And I understand that it's supposed to be on like a grassy plain, but there's just so much negative space in the background here. Like, I really believe that they should have at least put like some clouds or something up here just to kind of fill it in. But outside of that, everything about this is fantastic, and I really, really like this one. We then get an advertisement for Mark Silvestri's Cyberforce action figures, and I can't recall ever seeing these out in the wild, though by the looks of this image, it seems to me that Mark is playing pretty fast and loose with the term action figure, as it looks as though most of these figures have at best like 3 points of articulation, meaning that the playability factor with these would be pretty limited, and even if you were buying them as a collector, you wouldn't really want to do anything more than keep them in the package, as even trying to pose these things on a shelf seems like it would be pretty lackluster. Getting back to the story, we see that the gargoyle who attacked Medieval Spawn is now instantly regretting that decision, as Medieval Spawn grabs him and immediately rips his body to pieces in a huge display of awesome power that sends blood and visceral gore all over the place. And this is something so violent that it shocks even Katarina and Stalker as they watch with gaping mouths and wide eyes. As Medieval Spawn then reaches to get his helmet, Katarina approaches from behind asking if he's okay. However, Medieval Spawn responds by yelling at her to keep her distance as he desperately tries to obscure his face from her view. Katarina obliges but takes offense at his hostile tone as Stalker asks what in the world is that guy's problem. Katarina responds by stating she doesn't know the bloody sod, and Stalker then takes this opportunity to try and impress her, asking if she saw the way that he shot down that one gargoyle with his crossbow. Katarina responds by stating, "Yeah, I was really impressed when I saw you running for your life and crapping your pants." Medieval Spawn then places the helmet back on his head and tells the other two that he's ready to continue. Meanwhile, back at the city of Belgardriel, we see that the outer wall has fallen and the forces of darkness are now bearing down on the city. Realizing that the victory of the darkness is close at hand, Royale then takes this opportunity to use his time wisely, as he states that it's of the essence. He immediately casts some sort of spell which creates a portal in front of him that he steps through and appears just outside of the camp of our heroes. He then overhears a interesting conversation where we see that Medieval Spawn explains to his two compatriots that he not only doesn't need food, he also doesn't require rest and will stand guard for the evening. Now, this is interesting for a few reasons. Number one, we did know that Spawn doesn't need to eat. This is exemplified even by Al Simmons in the future. But something that's quite different here is that we oftentimes see Al sleeping in the alleyways, and it's very unique that, well, seemingly unique, that Medieval Spawn doesn't also require any type of sleep or rest. And it brings up some interesting questions on whether or not this is something that all spawns could do or just some spawns have this ability. It's not really clear why he doesn't need to sleep, but Al so often does. Also, the interaction that happens over here where we see Medieval Spawn desperately trying to hide his face from Katarina would imply that the events that are taking place in this miniseries are indeed happening after the events that were described by the Violator in issues 14 and 15 of the ongoing series of Spawn. You can check those out in my Spawn playlist if you'd like to know what I'm talking about. It's at this point that our hero's conversation is interrupted when Royale makes himself known to the group. They immediately draw their weapons and demand to know who this stranger is, and at this point, Royale introduces himself and weaves quite the deceitful tale, as he tells them that upon witnessing the invasion of the forces of darkness, he tried to use his magical powers as a sorcerer to aid in the land's defense. Unfortunately, he wasn't strong enough, which is why he's now here trying to enlist the aid of these three warriors, as he believes that they're the only hope left in defending the city. He then explains to Katarina that she is of most importance because she wears the Witchblade Gauntlet, which is the only thing capable of defeating the darkness. Katarina doesn't really understand what he means and asks him to explain further. He then goes on to tell her that only one woman per generation can don the gauntlet, and if anyone else tries to wear it, they suffer some pretty terrible consequences. He then tells her that the women who wear this gauntlet go on to become very celebrated warriors whose exploits are sung about and talked about for generations as they go on to become heroes of their age. We then see these really cool depictions of other Witchblade wearers throughout history. One seems to be a Celtic warrior. I really like this one, this woman from Egypt, as, you know, this is just a really cool idea that that's how far it goes back into the ancient times of Egypt. And we also see this woman, though, who seems to be a Viking of sorts, which I find interesting because the Viking age definitely overlapped with the medieval age, which would imply that this woman is not from that far different a time than Katarina is. After learning all this new information about the Witchblade, Katarina is quite excited about this newfound magical armor she now dons. Royale then tells the team that they need to make haste to the city if they want to prevent the forces of darkness from being victorious, and that they have no time to waste. However, Medieval Spawn tells Royale that they have to discuss this first. And while he seems tentative, Katarina tells him that this is the quickest way for them to get to the city and that they should take Royale up on his offer. I find it interesting here that Stalker, despite being the biggest scumbag in the entire story, is the only one that actually has the right instincts about Royale, as he tells the other two that he doesn't trust him an inch and that they shouldn't follow his lead. However, the other two overrule Stalker and tell Royale that they will join him in his quest and go with him to the city. Royale immediately opens up a new portal and steps through, and as we see Medieval Spawn following Royale's lead, Stalker then brings up to Katarina that once they get to the city and get all the treasure, he's going to be fabulously wealthy, and that Katarina should reconsider her previous opinion as she'd be quite lucky to have such a catch on her arm. Katarina, though, is not impressed whatsoever and reminds Stalker that she's also going to be fabulously wealthy and that this isn't exactly something that's going to intrigue her in any way. Realizing that he stuck his foot in his mouth, Stalker then states, "Oh yeah, I forgot about that part." Meanwhile, back at Belgardale, we see the last of the elvish forces fall to Lord Cardinale's blade. He then yells out for his forces to canvass the city and find all of the magical artifacts that the elves had within. We then see the heroes, along with Royale, step through a portal as Royale tells them to keep their heads down, that they don't want to expose themselves too quickly. He then tells them that inside of a nearby tower is where the elves have stowed all of their magic that Lord Cardinale is searching for. He tells them that it's guarded by powerful spells, which is why he couldn't teleport them directly into the tower, and that they have to hold off Lord Cardinale's forces while he goes inside of the tower and basically nullifies the elven magic so that Lord Cardinale can never get his hands on it. Immediately, Katarina and Medieval Spawn agree to this plan with really no question of exactly if this is the case. They're just kind of going along with Royale, and it seems really like a bad idea that they're just taking him on his word on everything. And once again, Stalker seems to be the only guy who has the right idea in questioning the story that Royale has been giving them. Meanwhile, Lord Cardinale asks Lady Eleanor where Royale is, as he will need Royale's ability to bond the elvish magic with his own darkness powers. At this point, Lady Eleanor decides that she needs to clue Cardinale in on exactly what happened between her and Royale, as she says, "I've been meaning to talk to you about that, my lord." Back at the base of the tower, as Royale enters the doorway, he turns back and tells our heroes that he will need about an hour to complete the spell. Medieval Spawn tells him that he will have it, as Royale says, "God bless you all." However, upon entering the tower under his breath, he says, "You idiots." We then see the forces of darkness make their way to the base of the tower, and Medieval Spawn and Katarina prepare themselves for battle. However, at this point, Stalker, realizing that there is a huge horde of monsters heading his way, decides that he's going to inadvertently take the correct course of action. He then tells the other two that he still doesn't trust Royale and that he's going to follow him inside of the tower to make sure that everything is on the up and up, and then asks, "You two have got this, right?" Realizing that this is just once again Stalker exhibiting his cowardice, Katarina gives him a sidelong glance as she says, "Yeah, I think we can manage." At this point, Lord Cardinale arrives with the rest of his darkness forces and asks who these two are, and tells them that he will not allow anyone to stand in defiance of his will. Katarina, though, says, "If I had a face like yours, I'd teach my ass to talk." At this point, Cardinale becomes enraged as he says, "Kill them," and tells his forces to charge forward. And Medieval Spawn says, "I've counted about 1,000 of them," to which Katarina responds, "Good, I can't wait for this fight." And on the final page of the story, we get a fantastic full-page splash as we see our two heroes readying themselves for battle, and Katarina screaming out, "Come and get it," as she points her spear at the forces of darkness. I find this interesting because while Katarina is quite a skilled warrior, and the Witchblade Gauntlet does in fact possess quite a bit of power, she's only just found this gauntlet like a few hours ago and is now willing to face down like 1,000 monsters with one other person at her side, and may in fact be a little bit overestimating what exactly her abilities are in this instance. We then come across our next pinup, I guess you would call it. This one is pencils by Michael Turner, inks by D. Tron, and colors by Jonathan D. Smith, and this one is also super cool in my opinion. And this is an absolutely phenomenal looking pinup. I really like this. I have one complaint. Now, some of you watching who have been around for a while might think that my complaint is that this is a vertical layout. That's not it at all. I'm actually okay with vertical layouts for pinups. My one problem is that because there are two pinups within this issue, only one of them could be the centerfold, which means that you can't actually remove this pinup from the book and hang it on your wall if you wanted to do that, because of it being on two separate pages instead of one big page. But outside of that, man, this is just so good. This is classic Michael Turner, man. This is such a reminder of what a great artist that guy was, and it really just sucks so bad that he died so young, man. We really lost out on a phenomenal talent, and I really wish he were still around to this day, still gracing the pages of Aspen Comics with his amazing abilities. On the final page of the book, we get an advertisement for issue number 3 of the Medieval Spawn Witchblade miniseries, which will be coming up next month, so stay tuned. And on the reverse inside cover, we get a lot of advertisements for upcoming Top Cow publications, but more importantly, we get this fantastic advertisement for a super cool ballistic statue. I didn't know this statue existed, and now I want it more than anything, so I'm really hoping that one day I'll have the chance to buy this. And that was Medieval Spawn Witchblade number 2. And I thought this was a fantastic issue. Obviously, it's no secret that I really love this miniseries, but I really enjoy the story. I feel like it has really good pacing. The action is phenomenal. The only critique I really have is just the unbelievable willingness that everyone seems to have in going along with Royale's plans. And when someone does stop them and bring up the idea that, hey, this guy's a total stranger and there's really no reason we should just be blindly trusting him, they're immediately ignored. That part doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But outside of that, I really enjoyed all of this story. It's just so much fun, and I really appreciate all the people who worked on it, despite the fact that it's a seemingly insane amount of people that it took to make this book happen. But then again, your opinions might be different. You might think that the action is too gory and too prevalent, and you might not think it's weird at all that everyone just goes along with Royale and that he's a necessary evil in creating the plot devices necessary to progress the story at the pace it's going. And if that's the case, it's okay, because everyone's entitled to their own opinions. If you enjoyed today's video, please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. And thanks for stopping by. Have a great day.